Good evening, everybody. We are going to begin. I am calling this meeting to order. We have here with us at our Public Safety Code Enforcement and Neighborhood Empowerment meeting, we have council members Tinajero and Villegas with us. And I do have a couple of public comment cards. We're probably like the last time, since it worked well, we'll have staff make its presentation, and then we will allow the public comments that will be more helpful for everybody. And I know, generally speaking, what staff is going to focus its presentation on are the changes made based off of the last meeting and communications in between that staff may have received. So with that, let's hear the staff presentation.
Sure. Good afternoon, Chair and council members. Tonight we have a brief presentation to basically cover the recommended changes and some follow-up based off of our last meeting that occurred on October 2nd. What you have here before you tonight is a collaboration between comments that we received from this committee as well as community feedback that was incorporated into the draft ordinance as a recommendation by this body. Here we have delivery was identified as a potential change, and we have incorporated that as far as changing the definition as well as the references in this new draft ordinance. So that it is now consistent with Measure BB. Under distribution, we have increased the number of licenses, so they are now capped at 20. And this was a discussion that we had amongst staff. We had made this recommendation in lieu of offering a micro business license. And the rationale behind that is that the micro business license does provide for allowing on-site consumption of cannabis. So we were trying to avoid having to add that because then it would not be consistent with Measure BB. Measure BB does not allow for on-site consumption. As far as the labor agreement, we did add language that is consistent with state requirements, so that is now part of the actual ordinance.
What word is that?
That is reflected under section... Get to that. That is reflected under page 13 of the red line version of the ordinance, and it is section 3Y. Moving on, additional modifications to the ordinance are included under the operating standards section, and many of these were brought forward by the community who voiced some concerns. So here we have revisions to section 4E. This is the rolling papers and lighters may be sold on site. Removal of section 4M, which is a limit for the display of cannabis products. Removal of section 4O, reference to lock and storage of cannabis products for sale, and we revised section 4P, which was specific to display signage, to now indicate who is doing the inspection of the cannabis products that are being sold at these sites. In addition to the modifications to the ordinance, there were some follow-up items that were recommended by this committee, as well as some of the information that we received from the public. One of them was moving of location for permanent holders and applicants. At this moment, staff has reviewed this, and our staff is recommending that at this moment in time we continue with the current location-specific permit as it has been implemented under Measure BB. Obviously, this is something that if there's a desire to look into, we could potentially look into later in the future, as it is tied to Measure BB. Items to consider as part of the application process and merit system. And we wanted to identify these because these are items that are outside of the ordinance, and we can include these as part of the application process or our administrative procedures, which includes the operational status. And I believe we're looking at the city of Long Beach as the potential language to use. And there's also considerations for Measure BB permit holders, consideration for social equity and local hire, as well as the folks that are on the wait list. And lastly here, there was some discussion in terms of the city potentially not being eligible for grants if we were to ban any type of cultivation. So we've received a response from the League of California Cities. We've also received a response from our state lobbyist, which is Townsend Public Affairs, and they're not consistent. So what we're doing now is we're going straight to the source. And we've had our state lobbyist contact Lori Ajax, who heads the Bureau of Cannabis Control, to make sure that we know and have the facts as far as the city eligibility for enforcement grants. Here's just quickly an overview of the timeline. We are scheduled to go to the City Council on the 17th, pending the recommendation from this body. Then moving on November 7th with a potential second reading of the ordinance. During November 7th meeting, we intend to provide the merit system criterion scoring, as well as the in lieu fee agreement template for approval by the City Council. And then November 8th through the 31st, we will start the application process and to kind of kick things off, with the anticipation of June 2nd being the implementation time. January 2nd. I'm thinking vacation.
Yeah, right.
And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Let's go to public comment, then we'll go to council. Let's hear from Peter Katz, then followed by Chad Wonka. Mr. Katz, welcome back.
Good evening, everyone. Mr. Chair. I have a quick legal question. I'm looking at page 22 on the limitations of the city's liability. And I'm kind of concerned. I don't know if you're familiar with the Rohrabacher Amendment, which expires on the 31st of October. The Rohrabacher Amendment in Congress prohibits the federal government from raiding marijuana shops that are legally set up by the city. And there's talk in Washington that this may not be extended. And if not, the Attorney General has already indicated plans on raiding marijuana shops in states that have legalized marijuana. And so my concern here says that, if I'm reading this right, is that if such raids occur, that the liability is solely upon the industry and that the city is not liable? I mean, that's the way I read this. So if such raids occur, where do we stand legally and as liable as far as the taxpayer is concerned? Thank you.
We don't have many cards. I think the complexity of today's issues are going to be simpler. So if you don't mind taking an initial
Yeah, I think
comment on that?
one of the things that we took into consideration when we drafted this ordinance was that exact contingency, which is that at this moment in time, although the Rohrabacher Amendment is still valid, it is set to expire, and we don't know. It's up in the air as to whether or not that will be renewed. And as such, we wanted to we wanted to have an indemnification provision, so to speak, entitled Limitations on the City's Liability here. So to answer your question, yes, it's in there for that reason, but there are other reasons as well. When we first instituted Measure BB, the city was bombarded with numerous lawsuits, many of which, well, all of which at this point have been dismissed. And so we wanted to take that into consideration as well as some other feedback we received from staff.
Very good. Next, let's hear from Chad Wonka.
Thank you. Good evening, council members and committee members and staff. I'm here primarily to discuss the location-specific permit. And while I understand staff's wanting to fit in with Measure BB, I think in the long run it would behoove the city to look at some method that would allow, we've just seen a bunch of fires in Santa Rosa, we've got fires in Anaheim Hills. If there was a fire in Santa Ana and you had a permit holder's building burned down, I think it's in the city's best interest to allow that person a process, or that company a process, to move locations without going through everything all over again. Buildings will burn down. CC&Rs might change in associations. You'll have leases expire. And sooner or later, the city will need to address some sort of transferability issue. I did drop off some language, proposed amendment language, to you at the last meeting, and then I emailed the Word document to Ms. Bogosian just to make it easier if there were any sorts of amendments. But I would like to strongly encourage that you look at some method of transferring locations, some way that the city can control that, but also allow people to. Because sooner or later it's going to come up, and there's no reason for the city to lose revenue because the city's processes and code doesn't allow this. In addition, just as another point of just good public policy, I think it would be really beneficial if the city could codify what's going to happen and your processes so that the business community understands what's going on. It sends a message that the city wants to be transparent, and it would allow new businesses that were coming in and the existing businesses to really understand exactly what's going on and what that process is. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. And I'll address that question in part, and if the staff wants to follow up, I've given that some more thought too, and I think a good part of the reason why the question is being asked is because it relates to what's in Measure BB, and really the work being done here isn't about BB; it's more about adult use and other licenses. But maybe in the future, if we do look at a broader array of changes to BB, it could be considered then. Also, with respect to other businesses that, for example, are regulated by the ABC, in those cases, if a building does get burned down, they do need to go through another application process. And there's many reasons for that. It's not just the state regulatory piece, but there are local building code and zoning and other issues. So we think what occurs here is consistent with what happens with other similarly regulated businesses. But that's not to say that in the future we shouldn't consider addressing other changes. But I think the big focus for the work of this committee and council is just to prepare for January of 2018 and adult use and licenses for their purposes. And I think staff had similar thoughts. I don't know if staff wants to add anything more to that.
Sure. The only anything that we'd like to add at this point is that the city attorney's office has worked with, I believe, 2 of our current collectives that are applying for the RSP, and I know they were having issues in securing the approval from their housing or from their HOAs. And we had worked out an indemnification letter, I believe, or agreement, which has been approved. So we are looking at other avenues to assist these folks that are having those issues with those HOAs.
Yeah. And that reminds me, another good point here why this issue might be better addressed later than now is we have a current waiting list, and there's some people that have fallen off the waiting list already that haven't had the benefit of moving. So if we do allow some opportunity for moving, it might be better after we kind of exhaust the waiting list, and that not only is it fair to prior folks, but it may prevent possible litigation there. Also, I think maybe about a month ago, the city council made some changes to the timeline processing for the wait list itself to make it move a little more quickly. So we don't want to so quickly undo the work of the staff and council on that regard. Next, let's hear from Irma Macias.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Irma Macias, and I'm here one more time to tell you that I am opposed to the items on your agenda, which is the ordinance regarding the adult use, distribution, cultivation, manufacturing, and testing of marijuana. Again, this is not the businesses that are welcome in our city. As much money that you guys need, find other ways. Think of the over 300,000 people that you have in this city. They are not in favor of these businesses. Think about the students that they don't need the pamphlets of information telling them not to use it, as it is alcohol. There is a lot of information about drugs. It's a lot of information. So please come to your senses and do what I think is best for our new generation. We don't need, I think they have a lot of challenges, and this is one of them that if they are not exposed, they won't be tempted to do it. So please take it into consideration, and I really appreciate my no vote in this. Thank you.
No, and thank you for bringing those comments back. Appreciate that. Next, Melahat Rafael with the Santa Ana Cannabis Association.
Good evening.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for pronouncing both of my names right. I appreciate that. Both are complicated. Thanks again to city staff and the policymakers for taking on such a challenge. I know it's not easy, and I appreciate the compacted timeline. We all do. That you're working so hard on this. More questions than statements, other than the fact that you guys were great. That was the statement. The questions we have about the timeline, when I look at the goals of having the applications ready for finalization and approval, ends at December 31st. Something that was mentioned about making sure that we get in time for the state licensing. If we're going by the Long Beach model where you're required to have a receipt before you're operational, when it comes to the manufacturing or the cultivation businesses, that's going to be impossible just because you can't grow the plant that fast and sell it that fast. So I would like some clarification on that. What does it mean to be operational? For us to be able to take advantage of state licensing and, again, additional revenues and everything else that we've all been working towards, we have to have an operational status in prior to having our state application filed. So that's where we need a little bit of clarification. And the other issue that I would like to have addressed is the volatile versus non-volatile manufacturing. I know that we've sent some information over about supercritical closed loop extraction, which is what is also considered volatile still. If you eat anything that has olive oil in it, if you're using essential oils, it's the same system that is used to extract these oils. States that have been doing this, Washington, Nevada, Colorado, have these closed loop systems that can work and would allow for that manufacturing. 95% of the manufacturing in this industry is considered volatile, which I hate saying that word because I think you think of like Breaking Bad in someone's backyard and things exploding. That's not what it happens in a professional regulated market. And we've sent information over, but it's all encapsulated. There's no risk to the other businesses, and we can show you all of that. Not having that available does limit the businesses that will come to the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear maybe some brief responses to these questions. And these last two items, they may require additional work between now and the council meeting, but to the extent that you can comment on one or both, staff, that would be appreciated.
We reached out to our colleagues at the Long Beach City Attorney's Office, and they advised us that with regard to the operational status, they deemed their businesses operational upon the issuance of the business license, and for that particular cannabis activity. So we're considering that as the model to use here, but nothing has been adopted yet.
So consideration of a business license is
When it's issued.
When it's issued,
for that
okay.
particular cannabis activity.
okay. That might be like a fair.
That's the way that they
Assessment.
handled it. That
So
way,
the
we can
deadline
assure
is-
they're in compliance with local laws.
Right. For operational status is what we're talking
For
about.
operational
Would that mean
status.
that the applications would have to be taken and accepted? If that's the case, and if they're accepting until December 31st, when do you have the time to grant that status before January 2nd?
Well, business license is a distinct item unrelated to the application, really. So maybe it's the business license and an application.
Well, I think what they're asking is they want clarification so that they know that, can we make that decision and make that clarification when, yeah.
Yeah, so the intent of the application process is really to start as soon as the ordinance receives its second reading. So we're not anticipating on holding off for the 30-day cure period, which will allow for the application process to take place. Give us enough time to review those applications and get back to the folks.
Do you anticipate that would be able to happen prior to the end of the year so that these existing businesses?
Correct. That our intent is to do whatever we can to have these operating definitions implemented, or the business license, or whatever method we select, before the January 2nd deadline.
And I think what you're suggesting is, since we're looking at a point system, so it would be who gets the most points, if we don't decide that till December 31st, then there's not time to issue a business license. So we need to look at that schedule, cutting off sometime before December 31st, review the points then if we have more applications than licenses to issue, and decide who they are. And so we have to move that end timeline up to give time to the issuance of a business license.
That was our concern.
Yeah.
Time.
Yeah, I understand that, and we'll think through that, but we do understand the problem, and we both have the same goal.
Yeah, and I think related to that, there needs to be clarity on when these applications are due so that we have the time to process it. You know, we don't want an application on the 30th of December, and, you know, where's my operational status letter from the city? So as we're looking at, you know, timeline considerations, let's be really clear on that. On the issue of the volatile activities, any additional thought from staff on whether that still makes sense to include?
May I share something before?
Yes, Councilman. Yes.
So what happened was that there were, back when things were illegal and people were operating in an illegal fashion, you had individuals who were not following the proper safety protocols that are, you know, that the state is demanding, because we didn't have any. There weren't any. So you had people, you know, catching their buildings on fire and doing those things. I believe that with regulations in Colorado and so forth, I think some of our staff went out and took a look at what they had. There's actual machinery now that we can use and, in fact, put into the ordinance to create that safety condition so that we don't have those issues. So, I mean, that's something that I just wanted to bring up as well.
So our consultant, purely from a public safety perspective, was provided us a recommendation, and I think it goes back to maybe the early stages of manufacturing or, you know, extraction procedures that were in place. But definitely we could potentially look into alternatives or see if there's any opportunity to look at what the definition of what volatile manufacturing, and maybe provide some type of clarity or enhanced public safety that we could potentially allow for some of these licenses. But at this point in time, because we just don't have that clarity, we would recommend only allowing non-volatile.
For the October 17th meeting, may I ask to see if we can get something on there? In other words, let's do the research on that, see what they're doing in other states and in other areas where they do allow for, like, the butane and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you remind me, just so I can find it here quickly and review some thoughts that I had? What page is the non-volatile?
It's on page 9 of the red line version, and basically what you have there is a table that identifies the different types of activities.
Page 9. You know, I don't know that I'm really looking at what I wanted to look at. Okay, I see it here. I know there's another area where it makes mention of what is meant by that and includes things like butane and a few other things. And I think when one then considers that, I mean, we allow those things in a manufacturing zone, and I think what's important just is you know, proper equipment and, you know, and
it goes to the safety standards.
Right.
The definition of volatile solvents is on page 7, and it's definition number 57.
Page 7. Yeah, so that's my concern, that really we allow these solvents in the manufacturing zone, because again, kind of as we gave the example of somebody that does testing or R&D for a variety of things that might include this, you have a variety of manufacturing facilities that use one or many of these solvents, and the key thing there is just that they're following, you know, OSHA rules and building safety, fire code, that we have, you know, or fire marshal or personnel review that for safety. I guess, a long story short, I think there's at least a couple of council members that want another review of that just to make sure that we're not making unlawful something that is already lawful in the manufacturing setting. And really, we just want the safety for the employees and the general public. We also have a buffering from residential areas, schools, kids. So that's an additional benefit. But I think just this definition of volatile solvent is, way too broad.
We'll look what's allowed in other manufacturing within the city and
Excellent.
see if we've tried to match existing rules, as you've heard, on many of these, and so why don't we look and see if we can match?
Yeah, or maybe it might be if there are volatile solvents involved that we write in there that it needs to be, pre-approval of the fire department or something else. Just because I know a lot of it too is even having it, but it's how much you have, how it's stored, the train involved. Are there sprinklers? I know there's a lot of considerations, and we again just want safety overall. So I think that addresses that point. I have a couple of questions on some other things. Well, before I have a couple more questions, I know Councilmember Villegas has one question he wanted to ask.
It was just about tax, but we'll get to that later, right?
I know that the in lieu tax agreement is going to come later, but I know we've all gotten calls or questions about what type of fees or taxes may be associated. Can you at least give a general description of how that is going to occur?
Sure. The in lieu fee agreements will be a combination of square footage, per square footage fee, as well as a gross receipts tax related to the sale of the goods. And we're recommending an 8% gross receipts tax on the sale.
8% on the receipts, and then there'll be some square footage.
Why not more? I thought there was like 10 or higher.
Measure BB allows between 5 and 10%. Right now, it's set at 5%.
But that one doesn't have a square footage.
It does not have a square footage. It is strictly for retail only.
The square footage is the manufacturing, distribution, testing, and the other uses was where we were looking at the square footage. And the 8%, we were looking at the market. We're looking at what other jurisdictions that are making similar decisions to what we're recommending so that we stay in that market. Not related to this, but not part of this recommendation, is we'd also be looking at increasing BB to 7?
6%.
6. I keep pushing 7, but I keep getting 6 back. Again, looking at the what other cities are doing, and cities are still making a distinction between people that have medical cards and allowing that to be at a lower tax level than the gross receipts tax on adult use. And so we're following that sort of
The medical card,
as well.
the medical use, I totally agree with that. It's the other half that you know how I feel about it, and I think the public knows how I feel about it. So I'm just saying that if we should raise the tax to make sure it covers all of the public safety that's going to be needed for that. Someone here mentioned about a program for children. I don't think that's going to help, but if you sleep better at night with that, well, then they should pay for it.
Why don't we commit to the committee, if you move this forward, that we will bring a list of all the other cities that we know of and what they're charging. We will have our recommendation, and then you will see what's happening in the industry, and it's certainly to the discretion of the council to decide where you think you would best place Santa Ana.
Yeah, because I do hear a lot of loose talk out there about people saying, "Oh, don't worry about if you get fined or something, we'll cover that." If they're going to talk that loose about it, then they can kick down a lot more tax, in my opinion. Because I still worry about our youth out there. I still worry people that are irresponsible regarding this. Well, I've said enough, and people know how I feel about it.
Yeah,
I'm just looking out for the youth, and if we're going to do any kind of programs or education, then it needs to be well funded. That's what I'm getting at.
No, that's a good point. I have a question too. So that's an in lieu fee that we're going to assess on the adult use at the retail side. Is there also going to be a sales tax?
Correct. It will also be 8%.
So there'll be a sales tax component.
Correct.
Plus this, so that helps. But I like the way you're thinking. We got to well fund our law enforcement and our youth programs. through this, so that is good. Councilmember Tinajero?
Yeah, and I think that as we move forward, the council gets to make those decisions on how they want to spend that revenue. But, just to bring us back a little bit, this was a very interesting time, as you recall, when Measure BB was created. It's because Measure CC had been created, and Measure CC. So I got to bring us back to. We're talking about children and so forth, where there was 120 illegal dispensaries right across the street from schools, on the way home from schools, near parks, in neighborhoods, and we didn't have the resources to shut those down. We just didn't. And Measure CC wanted to put these dispensaries in commercial zones. So when you went grocery shopping, you were going to have a nice dispensary right next door. That, to me, was much more visible, much more harmful. And we created Measure BB. And I'll be honest with you, I carried that water, and I was the one that I was the face of Measure BB during that election, because I knew that if it didn't pass, that was going to continue to explode because we did not have the resources to stop it. That was passed by the voters. So when I hear people say our community doesn't want it, I just want to remind everyone, it was a super majority. It was 65.9% of the residents voted for Measure BB. So our community, of all the communities in Orange County, is the one community that just didn't pass it by a majority, but it was a super majority. So our job as electeds is to assure that our ordinances are correct, that we have resources to hire more police officers to enforce, so that we continue to shut down the road shops, and we make this industry a safe industry within our city. And we could be the model for others to do it the right way. And so I think as revenue is coming in, as a council, we have the responsibility to allocate funds in the way that we know best to protect our community, to protect our quality of life, and to protect our students, to protect our youth. Look, I'm an educator. There's nobody else that's going to tell me that they've done more for kids than I have. I've spent my entire life. That's what I do for a living. But this ordinance doesn't say sell to kids. It says adults 21 and over. Okay, so that's out there. What I have to caution us is if you tax too high, you create a strong black market. And that's what Denver saw. Okay, so we have to find that nice equilibrium, like I said, and that's why I'm bringing up the money. I think what Councilman Villegas is his intention is correct, and his heart is in the right place. And I'm with him on that. I just think as we make decisions, we make sure that we balance it to make sure that it's successful on all fronts.
And I think that's why I like the idea of the city managers to have an assessment of what other comparable cities are doing, so we know where we're at in the market and that it's reasonable. I have a couple other points, and then I did get one more speaker card on delivery. I know there was an edit made, and I think the edit still will allow what was crossed out, but it seems that staff is crossing out delivery to personal residence, but instead is now saying delivery can occur anywhere within the jurisdiction of the state of California, which would mean that delivery can still be made to a personal residence. Am I reading that correctly?
That is correct. The current ordinance on delivery that was approved by the City Council allows delivery to other locations other than a personal residence. So by us striking that language referencing personal residence now, this ordinance is now consistent with Measure B.
Okay, so it's broader and more inclusive. That's fine. And then I know at our last council meeting, we talked a little bit about the number of distribution licenses that we might do, and staff did increase it, and I do appreciate that consideration. But I think that the new number being suggested is 20, but we have up to 23 potential retail adult use sites. Is it envisioned that they all wouldn't want one or need one? Or what type of, what's your idea for the type of demand that we may have for distribution licenses? And a little wiggle room so that we might have an availability for our other retail sites to also have one.
When we were looking at the numbers of licenses, we were looking at what were the possibilities of some of these dispensaries either doing vertical integration or just simply doing retail or just having one type of license. So we didn't envision every single dispensary owning every single license that we were going to offer. So there will be some retail shops that are just going to be simply retail.
Okay.
So that's how we were envisioning the numbers.
And I think it's tied a little more to cultivation, where retail would choose to have a small cultivation and then may have product that they wanted to distribute to other retail. So we looked more at it matching up with the cultivation than the retail itself.
Got it. And at least in the short term, we don't have 20 dispensaries. There's only, I think, 17, I believe. So at least between now and the end of the calendar year, there probably will be, at a minimum, 3 distribution licenses that can go to non-retail outlets. But again, maybe more because, probably some of the current retail sites may not want one. And maybe on that note, let me have Malahat come back up and address that question. And I know you maybe had another thing you wanted to share.
Can you repeat the question?
Can you speak to this question of distribution licenses and of retail dispensaries, which your association currently largely represents, though others do as well? Do you envision most of the retail outlets wanting a distribution license as well, or if you could give us a general
I would
sense?
actually say let's talk to one of the operators of the permitted shops. I anticipate that most of the distribution would be either manufacturing or cultivation as well. If I could yield my time to our president of the Santa Ana Cannabis Association, Jason Quinones, to answer that part.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, staff. I personally think that it depends on the size of the location. Some locations have 1,500 square feet, some have 20,000, so it's not all going to land onto the retail location to get the distribution license. So it all depends on that as well, too.
Okay.
So
So to 20, significantly more than I think we had 5 proposed at our last meeting. So 20 may be then a reasonable start.
ideally, it depends. Well, we're thinking like 40, but if 20 works, then
Okay.
that works.
So we're getting there. We're 5.
Because the reason why I say 40 is because you have to separate manufacturing and cultivation. They're two different businesses.
Yeah,
They're two different
right,
licenses. So
right.
that's the reason why.
We have
Right.
another operator that has comments that are more valuable than mine on this.
Well, just so you know, the number 40 wasn't just pulled out as like a wish list number. If you think about cultivation and you think about manufacturing, there's a possibility of having 40 different individuals that hold those licenses. And if you're cultivating, you need to distribute that product. And as the industry moves forward, the industry trend is that flower is getting sold less and less, and manufacturing and extracts are more and more. So as manufacturing increases, you're going to need distribution for that manufacturing as well. So in a theoretical environment, if you had the 20 cultivation, the 20 manufacturing, 40 distribution license would be able to cover all of that. So that's where that number came from.
Thank you for clarifying that, because that's one of the things that did concern me a little bit is, since we are the only game in town, I mean, the Costa Mesa ordinance comes nowhere near what we're doing. And they're talking about a huge explosion in demand statewide. So this is distribution that's not just local. It's going to go statewide. And so I think that maybe we ought to look at that number and elevate it. Maybe we find a happy spot between that, because do you see what he's talking about? Is we may not have enough people to distribute the product across the state, which in turn is going to hurt us as far as tax revenue goes and so forth. And so I don't know if 40 is the number. I mean, I'm not, you guys are the staff, but I would like to revisit that and still think about increasing that.
Yeah, or at least keep thinking about it. I think we're getting close. And I think there's also going to be the reality, especially since most of the industry, at least locally, is working together. You're also going to have some shared distribution. So you may
I
have,
understand, but
a few of these businesses that are going to pull their resources and have, one shipping system, one license, rather than, duplicating it all. But 20 is better. But just a little bit more thought, I think, is what we're saying.
And that's what it is, and that's because we don't want to have to come back here again to make another adjustment. And so I want us just to be forward thinking about what the possibilities are. and that's all I'm asking. That's why I didn't give you a number. I'm not an expert.
Very good. Malaha, did you have one more item?
Thank you so much. Some of the points I wanted to make. I think some of you know that I was appointed and sat on the Los Angeles County Regulatory Committee to make recommendations for unincorporated LA County. One of the things that we focused on and the studies showed is what happens with the taxation. This is an industry that primarily, like so many other industries, right, it's price-based. So a patient or a consumer can get the flower much less expensive at a shop that's rogue, an illicit shop. So when if the goal is to promote the regulation of this industry and to have not just the revenue for use of the city, which I know you need, but it's not the only reason you're doing this, not just the revenue, but the operators that are good, who are not having their bottle caps in the neighborhoods, who, it's sleeping better at night is not the only reason we take care of youth services. It's because it's the number one way to prevent youth access is to have after-school programs, so they're not going out and buying the weed. So they're playing football or soccer or something else. But whatever the resources are that the city wants to use can use. When the taxes are so high that the business owners can't advertise or have the product at the same price as the illicit businesses. I'll just tell you, you can buy an eighth at an illegal shop for $20, $25. To be able to break even, no profit, because we're collectives, we're not making any profit, to break even with the taxes, with the state, local taxes, and again, we've got employees that we're paying a living wage to. We've got buildings that we're paying taxes on. We're open limited hours. Better now, but we were open limited hours. That would be $45 minimum. So we have a $20 difference to break even. You're going to have people going to those illicit businesses because it's much more affordable for them. If you were to shut the stores down, all of them, and raise the tax, that would be one thing. But if you're just going to raise the tax and have these illicit businesses open, it's not going to help drive the business to the regulated shops. I know you guys are doing everything you can to shut these rogue shops down, but they've got mechanisms to get around it. I know that code enforcement, when they had possibly had resources for their own department, asked for more resources in the city attorney's department so they could enforce and go after what's going on here. So that's a major issue to consider. It's not just about sending business out elsewhere. Costa Mesa's got 6%. I think Long Beach has 6% when it comes to manufacturing. Add that to the 15% excise tax the state's going to take. We want to make sure that this is something where the illicit market doesn't come back in with a stronger vengeance because it's just too expensive to do the business in the city.
Thank you. And on the fee amount, that's going to come back at a separate time, so we can have a broader discussion. But I do appreciate the context on. I do appreciate that staff has put in the state regulation regarding labor and peace agreements. But I know I'd be really more supportive of what Long Beach has, which is when it's 2 employees or more. And so maybe we can make that decision here. So when it goes to the council, that's a clear recommendation. I don't know if any of my colleagues. So the state says for the labor piece, when it's 20 or more employees, the Long Beach says 2 or more employees. Staff, just at least to get us started, put in what the state provision is, which is 20, but really, if you're just putting in the state provision, you almost then don't need it here because it's already the law of the land. So I guess the question here for my committee colleagues is whether we want the Long Beach standard, which is kind of the newer standard, probably a better standard, or the state standard.
I think we should probably go with the Long Beach.
Okay.
I think that's a good point you bring up.
Yeah. So when we move the actions today, it'll be with that change. I'll just because this is important. If there are any last public comments, if you could fill out a card, and we will call you. So we'll hear from Chad Wonka. We already have you here, so that's fine. But if there's anybody else, this is the time, because this will be the last set of public comment that we'll take, because we are now wrapping up, and this will go to the council at the October 17th meeting. Yes, Chad.
In my work, I'm regularly in city halls of different cities all over Southern California, and one of the things I hear from other city managers is that their cities aren't willing to do what you've done and take the risk that you've done, put the money into doing this right. What they're doing is they're waiting to see how you do it. And one of the concerns that I would have is that if you overly restrict the manufacturing, that you'll max out, and then other cities will pick up the slack, and they'll get the tax revenue.
That's it.
And they're just really riding on all the work and the money that you spent in doing this. Santa Ana's got a great location. You know what you're doing. You've got a comprehensive ordinance, and I think it would just be a shame to see you lose the revenue because another city is just going to, piggyback on your work. So that's something I've been hearing from cities that probably most of us wouldn't think would even consider something like this. But I think we'll see some of those cities kind of pick up later on, and be ashamed to see you miss out on it.
I appreciate that, and I'm sure we all have our own thoughts. Part of my thought, too, though, is we don't want to replace some of our very good manufacturing facilities that have good paying jobs that advance manufacturing and swap it all out for some jobs that maybe don't pay as well. So we got to find that balance. And and in the future, we can always increase the number if the council liked where it was at and where the industry is heading. So I think we're trying to be mindful of that. Any other comments or questions from my colleagues before we consider a motion? Councilmember Villegas, anything else?
No comment.
Thank you. Councilmember Tinajero?
No, then I'll go ahead and make a motion
Please
to
do.
move and bring this up to the entire council at the October 17th meeting.
I'll second that with the friendly amendment that on the labor piece item that it be the mirror of what Long Beach is doing, which is when it's 2 employees or more. And then we did discuss, staff continuing to look at the issue of operational status and timelines, as well as volatile activities or materials. So with that, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
No.
Those opposed?
No.
1 no. So that motion passes 2-1, and it'll be considered at our council meeting on October 17th. Any other council committee comments unrelated to this item?
Nope.
Seeing none, this meeting is, and having heard no future agenda items, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.